Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled HOA Treasurer Stole My Property. She got 3 years in jail for stealing $183,000. This story is a beautiful undoing of a woman and her son's crimes against me and my neighborhood. This is one of my favorites to tell and definitely one of the most satisfying moments of my life. It all started in my quaint South African neighborhood with my neighbor Jane, a sweet woman in her 50s that enjoyed gardening and was also a prestigious member of the HOA board, even being the treasurer. She was an accountant for years before retiring, but grew bored with it and decided to become the HOA treasurer. It seemed appropriate and I never suspected a thing until I finally paid off my house and received the final deed paperwork in the mail. Attached to this deed was the property surveyor information from when the house was originally built. I honestly had no idea that this would be included after I paid off the house, but I am glad it was because I very quickly realized something strange. The property lines that were shown on my blueprint of the surveyed plot were much larger than the ones that I actually had currently. I went outside and stared at my yard and then the map of my land, and sure as hell, my property was smaller now than it was when originally first built. After I realized how obvious it was, I was pretty surprised that I had never noticed how lopsided my property was. My land facing Jane's house was much shorter, and on the other side I had a fair and even amount of room compared to the other neighbor. Now, Jane has lived in her home for over a decade. I always assumed that this was the established land and would have never questioned it. But now something just seems strange. When I moved into the house about 5 years ago, I thought that the property lines were what they were and there was not much else to say about it. However, I was apparently wrong. Feeling confused and a little miffed, I casually struck up a normal conversation with Jane while she was outside gardening like she did every morning. I mentioned to her that I had finally paid off my house and that I got my deed in the mail. She was happy for me and cordial, but once I brought up the daunting part about the surveyed property lines on the deed, her tone completely changed. At first, she acted like she did not understand what I was saying, and then she acted like she remembered that the old owner of my home had given her the land years ago and that they never updated my deed's property lines. Something about this just seemed off still and I acted unbothered, but deep down I wanted to find out more. I began paying a lot of attention to Jane and what she was doing. I quickly realized that she always had a very nice car and expensive clothes, even though she claims that she lived off of her humble pension. Not only that, but I recalled how she had several aspects of her home upgraded in the last year or two as well. A new kitchen, a new back deck, new floors, etc. She even had a little pond put in her backyard with a bunch of landscaping around it, and by her backyard I really mean my backyard, because according to my deed, over half of her precious side garden is in my yard. Right around this time, everyone in the neighborhood received a letter from the HOA president stating that they were going to increase the dues this year by almost $100 because they needed more to keep up with the common areas. I'll admit they seemed a little more run down than usual, but why? They should have plenty of money to cover the common areas, right? Well, this is when the wheels started turning in my head, putting some of the pieces to this weird puzzle together. The president always signed his name Michael on the HOA papers that they would send out. I don't know how I never realized it, but I recalled Jane mentioning that her first husband was named Michael and that he had died when she was pregnant with their son, who she named after him. She later remarried and changed her name to her new husband's. Interesting, right? So remember my conversation with Jane about my deed and the property lines? Well, not too long after this talk, she came over to show me a surveyor document that she had from only a few weeks before I had purchased my home. She was trying to hide the date that it was done from me by keeping it covered with her thumb, but I pulled it from her grip so I could see. According to this surveyor, my property lines were much shorter than the version I had, pretty much exactly where I had thought they were originally. I took a picture of the papers and thanked her for showing me. I started immediately looking into the surveying company that did this, and they did not even have a website. The paperwork seemed strange and as if it was a Google document, but there was a phone number. When I managed to get an answer, the guy did not even introduce himself as a company, and as I started asking him questions, I could tell that he was growing more uncomfortable. Finally, I asked if he knew that he had made a document with an incorrect property line, and that if there was a change to the land between the original homeowner that they had failed to turn in proper documentation to the necessary government department. He stammered and said that he was not involved with that and hung up the phone. At that point it became pretty obvious what was going on now. I reached out to the HOA vice president because I was suspicious of Michael being Jane's son. I informed him of what I was suspicious of. Firstly, her stealing my land, and secondly, why would they need more money? He said that he never was informed that the president had put out a letter increasing HOA dues. Apparently this was something that was being hidden from the other HOA board members. We exchanged numbers and he said he would reach out to me. Only a day or two later, I received a phone call from the HOA vice president, and he said that when he checked the bank account that Jane was in control of, there sure as hell was only about $123 in it, when there should be closer to about $30K. He immediately called the authorities and she was arrested and questioned. I'll admit that I kind of felt bad though. Jane was always pretty nice, and until recently I had no issues with her. However, if she really had been embezzling money from the neighborhood, that is messed up and she should have to answer for it. I was also concerned about whether or not I would be able to get my land back. I know that the deed showed that she was on my property, but I was worried about adverse possession laws. Thankfully though, I found out later that she would have had to be on that property for about 30 years or something crazy before she could actually claim it as hers. Anyway, as time went on, Jane saw her day in court. The president did turn out to be her son, but she managed to keep him out of trouble. Well, sort of. He did not see any jail time, but he did end up having to pay a pretty big fine for being loosely involved in it, or at least being aware of it but not saying anything. Jane, on the other hand, was not as lucky and did end up being sentenced to a little over 3 years in jail, which I would say is better than the original 12 years. It turned out she stole a whopping $183,000 over an 8-year time span. How she managed to keep her son from being sent to jail along with her is beyond me. I am sure he was involved, but they could not prove that he had taken any money. He ended up leaving the HOA after Jane was sentenced, assuming whatever fine he had to pay was too much for him to handle. I was approached by the vice president about becoming the new president, but I declined, preferring to just sell my house and leave. Now that I had the updated property lines, I was even able to sell my home for more than I purchased it for. Overall, it was a win-win for me, but I still feel bad about Jane being in jail, but maybe she shouldn't have been embezzling money from her neighbors. And yeah, Ripe Stars, to be honest, I am not exactly sure why the OP in this story feels bad about Jane being in jail, because obviously she's a criminal and she not only stole money from the entire HOA, but she also tried to take away OP's land. Either way, if you still enjoy the crazy HOA and crazy neighbor stories, then I would really appreciate it if you could like the video, because that would help my channel tremendously. Thank you so much in advance. The next one is titled HOA Shenanigans. Today I will tell you a story about my experience living in an HOA. It is long, so please be warned. This happened around 9 to 10 years ago when I was still in my teens and I was unaware really of what an HOA is. It was summer and my parents wanted to go on vacation. Me being a 16-year-old idiot with both a gaming addiction and seeing my cue to living the free, independent, unsupervised life, must like a house cat with an open door for 2 weeks opportunity, offered to house and dog sit while they and my sister went on vacation. Some important background info is probably needed here, since else some idiots might call my parents neglectful for leaving a 16-year-old unsupervised for 2 weeks. I am from a way safer and secure place than the US, we lived in the suburb and I was taught most life skills by the time I was 12. While gaming took 90% of my time away and I developed the day and night schedule of a back-end developer, I still did all the chores around the house with a few exceptions, since I deemed they could wait. I checked the mailbox and there is a handwritten letter with runes of the ancient. Using my old doctor's notes as a Rosetta Stone, I deciphered that it was from the president of our equivalent of an HOA. Imagine an HOA with a fifth of the power the typical HOA in the US has. A Hawkeye of the HOA Avengers. If it was in a sport, it would only receive participation awards, you get the point. The Moria-written tomb said that the grass of my front lawn was too tall according to the regulations. I went out, took a look at the grass, which was maybe 1 centimeter too tall. That's the equivalent of a jelly bean to my freedom measurement, folks. The same day I cut the grass, because might as well do so to keep the peace. The day after, a new letter written by the same Shakespeare wannabe came. I grabbed my Indiana Jones hat and performed an heathen ritual in the shed to read the message. The roses in my front yard were going too far out through the fence by 15 centimeters, which is the size of an average carrot in America, and I once again comply. On the 3rd day of this, the true cause of annoyance said to me, my backyard bushes were too tall. Here is where I finally get irritated, since you have to enter my parents' property to check the bush's height. With Satan's 3 commandments in hand, I go and visit my direct neighbor, who I knew were in the HOA board. I ask her about the gutter speak letters and she looks through them and laughs. Those are from the Banshee of Arrakis, aka the Mega Karen who lived 10 houses further down the street. She had been kicked out of the HOA board after she poisoned 3 dogs in the neighborhood with rat poison-laced treats, not wanting to deal with her after she threw rocks at me when I was trick-or-treating as a child. I decided to let the case rest and leave my bushes be untrimmed. The boy, the planted bomb, and the instigation. Next chapter. Fast forward a week into my parents' vacation. After being alone for 7 days, I finally mastered the art of playing Mozart's Requiem on the flute and decided to do something else. As any teenager would, I started to plan a party, and like the good kid I was, I went around to all my nearby neighbors and warned them about the potential noise which parties tend to create. At some point here in my clarity, I remembered the saying, "A-holes be fading, but a good Counter-Strike match lasts forever." Instead of holding a straight-up party, I decided to invite friends over to a LAN party so we could play Counter-Strike Source and quickly replace the white blood cells in our body with whatever was in the knockoff energy drinks. Fast forward to said LAN party, my parents' dining room smells like farts, Axe body spray, sweat and all chips in the world mixed together. Typical LAN stuff. 1 AM there is a loud knock on the door. I go out to see 2 cops looking at me with a surprised Pikachu face. I look at them with the same amount of confusion. Cop number 1, we have a report that there is a loud party going on and there might be several minors doing drugs here. Me, do energy drinks count as drugs? Cop number 2, no? Then I have no idea what you are talking about. We had a frantic woman calling constantly, which is why we came, but it seems we are more of a disturbance than you guys are. At the same time, one of my friends can be heard in the background. OP, get in here! The bomb has been planted, and you're the only one alive. Cop number 1, Counter-Strike? Me, yep, Counter-Strike. We will leave you to it then. The cops left and we lost the match. Unrelated though. 2 days after, I get another knock on my door. There she is, the bane of all good. She who must not be mentioned without carrying Mirak's sword and a towel on you. She starts screaming that me and my drug party kept her up all night and that I am a horrible brat who needs to tend to my bushes if my parents don't want to lose their house. At this point, I stop her and remind her that 1. The HOA doesn't have the power to do that. They hardly have the power to do anything except approve of house owner requests, and number 2, that she was kicked out of the HOA due to the poison incident. Number 3, I did not even have a party, and number 4, that she needs to stay the F away from my backyard. She got even madder and started screaming that she would have me and my parents arrested and that the poisoned treats were meant for my dog as well. I slammed the door on her faster than hyperspacing from Argos Row. She had royally pissed me off. No one threatens my good boy. No one. Perfect legal pettiness, so now we are at our final act, my revenge. I had about 4 days before my parents returned, so I made them count. I called the police and visited my real HOA neighbor and got all the necessary approvals. Then I went over and talked with the neighbors surrounding her house. I would do all the yard work which involved loud equipment around her house. Legally, we were allowed to make noise from 8 AM till 8 PM with yard work, but it is considered rude to do it after 5 PM. That did not stop me though. I just kept sending leaves and grass flying as if all the bushes, trees and odd plants had pissed in my grandfather's ashes. She came out and screamed at me, even threw a rock at me. It brought back old memories, but I did not care. I was gonna make just as much legal sound as possible. Whenever she complained, I just told her that their plans were not up to HOA standard. Friday rolls around, it is 8 AM, me and my friends are gathered in front of her house. We have all the tools ready, purchased by the blood coin of my insanity-induced labor the 2 days prior. It is time to make her pay. We turn on the speaker, the barbecue and crack up a beer. Speaker is set to the exact legal limit of how loud the music is allowed to be. Most her neighbors come out and join during the day, since I had invited them while kill-billing their plans. She screamed constantly for an hour, called the cops twice, which left after seeing my permits from themselves and the HOA. That's right, Karen, if you want a party to complain about, then you shall get the finest party of the Shire just outside of your house. We kept it up to the exact time limit. Edit for those who have not read my comments, all 3 dogs survived and she was served and settled out of court. She moved a couple of years after my revenge took place, unrelated to the incident, and so did my parents, which means I don't know what happened to her in the end. Maybe she is dead, maybe she is being mean to some kids somewhere else, or maybe she turned around and became a nice person. And the next one is titled HOA Wants a War. I live in a rural area on a family farm. The farm next to ours was sold to a developer who built a bunch of mini mansions that have an HOA. Now, the mini mansions back up to my family farm. I get letters every week from the HOA complaining about the tractor sitting in the field at the front of my property where it can be seen from the street. We are working that field and the tractor is necessary. I've had them complain about my barns, outbuildings, the sound of the large tractor when I'm seeding, and once half my grandfather saw some people he did not recognize checking out the barn, went out with his double-barrel 12-gauge to see what they were up to. They were HOA inspectors who declared their right to inspect the building to make sure it met HOA rules. My grandfather is not politically correct, and I was pleased he restrained himself from using 00 buckshot to register his opinion of trespassers, and yes, our property is fenced and posted. I was informed by the HOA that they were going to fine me $1,000 a day until the offending striations and machinery were removed. I informed them that I and my property are not part of the HOA, and if their inspectors set foot on my property again, I would have them arrested or let my grandfather loose with his double barrel. They went nuts and called the county sheriff's office. Having lived here for generations, I know the sheriff. He came out and asked me what was going on, and I told him. He also visited the HOA and heard their demands that he take immediate action to protect their inspectors. They were less than happy when he informed them that since my property is posted and fenced, I was well within my rights to not allow them on my land. Also, because of our livestock, a 12-gauge shotgun is not unreasonable because of predators. He also informed them that as I am not a member of the HOA, I have no requirement to allow them on my land, and if he gets another call, he will arrest the inspectors for criminal trespass. I have since been sent a letter from the HOA's lawyer telling to cease and desist all operations until they get a court date because they are suing me for damaging the value of their property. I forwarded it to my lawyer who, after he got done laughing, was amazed. First, because a court has to issue a cease and desist order, and secondly, we've been here farming for 4 generations. I have spoken with the HOA board and told them to leave us or we will be more than happy to play our lawyer is better than their lawyer. I was informed that the developer of their property assured them that I would be selling my land for development to an organization like his that has since resolved into the either, I'm not sure. Anyway, they were more than a little surprised when I told them that we are currently training the 5th generation to take over and we have no intention of selling our farm, period. Seems the developer left them with impressions that I was selling my property to be developed like my neighbors had been, only to make his money and run. God have mercy on overzealous HOAs. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support and I hope to see you again tomorrow.